Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Canada has a productivity problem. That isn't new. But what is new is the political and economic environment in which we find ourselves. At a time of nation building, can we tackle more than just infrastructure? This is Catherine Beaudry. She is a professor at Polytechnique, Montreal, and holds the Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Management and Economics of Innovation. She is also an Institute Fellow in Residence. In her report, Unleashing Innovation, Barriers, Government Support Programs, and What Works Best, she provides evidence on how companies respond to innovation obstacles and how they address financial barriers like lack of capital. What can Ottawa learn? For the answers, she joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you.
So why does Canada keep underperforming on innovation despite decades of government support?
Well, this is a really important question. If the answer was simple, I think we would have found a solution and have solved the problem a long time ago. So I think the answer is multifaceted. So let's examine, innovation in enterprise, because this is what I study. So we have, roughly product innovation and business process innovation. So the two main innovation categories of the Oslo Manual. So first, it's firms that innovate. It's not the government. And innovation is not an end as such. So it is basically the results of innovation that is that what matters. So in other words, what we're interested in is, does it contribute to increasing revenues, increasing growth, increasing productivity, as you mentioned, and so on. So counting innovations doesn't tell us much. So first, to answer your question, Canadians underinvest in research and development. So we know that compared to other countries. In 2023, Canada's gross domestic spending on R&D as a percentage of GDP was 1.8%, when I think the OECD was around 2.7%. And since our prime minister's in Korea is 5%. Sweden is 3.6%. And if you look now at the portion that is attributable to business R&D, so specifically the R&D that is performed within firms, it's only 1.1% when the OECD average is about 2%. Sweden is 2.7%, and I think Korea is about 1% less than what I said, so around 3.94%. That said, we're a resource-based economy to some extent, in the sense that we export a lot of natural resources and agri-food without much transformation. So that brings me to the innovation process. I mean, we do innovate in these, primary sectors. But if we dig it from the ground, put the content in a container, and ship it elsewhere for transformation, we basically offshore the value added without capitalizing on our resources. So the results from innovation in the extraction is minimal. So without the multiplier effect of innovation along the value chain, then there's not much we can do, and there's not much revenue. So we don't actually increase the numerator of the productivity equation. Third, Canadians also are late in their digital transformation. So both in terms of adopting digital technology, but also providing the training for their employees to fully exploit these technologies. I think I'm third or fourth. I lost count, sorry.
Well, to your point, there are multiple explanations for why Canada lags around the world. And the idea that we're drawers of water and hewers of wood and we just pass that on is only part of that problem. But you said something super interesting to me right at the start, which is governments don't innovate. Companies innovate. And you're making the connection between productivity and innovation. How do we encourage companies to be more innovative and therefore more productive?
Well, I mentioned business process innovation and product innovation to start with. And these act on, if you think of the productivity equation as a very simple ratio, where you basically have output, whatever you measure it, and how we make things, the input size. Product innovation actually works on the numerator. How do we make more money, introduce more products, and business process acts on the denominator. So how do we improve things? How we transform things better? How do we use our physical capital and human capital better to be more efficient? So we need to target both the numerator and the denominator. So innovation basically acts on both sides of the innovation equation, or the productivity equation. Sorry. So how do we improve that? Well, you need to focus on innovation in order to get to productivity in the end.
So then when we focus on that mathematical analogy, it sounds like what you're saying is the government's role is more on the denominator side of things, and we
not
need to make some...
Not necessarily, because the business innovation and growth support will allow the firm to innovate, whether it is product innovation or whether it's business process innovation. So I think the government has a role on both. I mean, it really depends on which type of programs that the firm actually uses. But they're not, they're innovating their way in the way they do things. But I was referring mostly to innovation in enterprise. And that's the innovation that will actually bring more money to the country.
I'm speaking to an academic here, so I'm trying to sort of walk this fine line. But let me just throw this out at you. Okay, everyone I've ever talked to about the topic of productivity in this country blames the government for not doing enough to help enterprise, and it's the regulations, it's the red tape, it's the. What is it?
Well, when I say that it's firms that take actions in their own hands, they're the ones that innovate. Government is there to support. They're not there necessarily as an incentive. I mean, if you don't have it inside you as a firm to innovate, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink. I mean,
Right, and so the water that we have are the shred tax credits, direct grants. These all increase the likelihood of innovation, but it apparently hasn't been enough.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why it hasn't been enough, but
it sounds to me like the one thing you're not doing is blaming the government.
Well, I don't think we gain much in blaming. The blame game. I'm a positive person. I think we can fine-tune and improve things. And at the moment, we're not measuring very well. We're not evaluating the programs. The firms don't know that the programs exist. They don't have the time to apply for the programs. I mean, it's just, it's not, there's no one culprit. We need to work together to actually improve things. So, for example, when we create spin-offs and small firms, there's a number of resources for them to innovate, to grow, to transform. But once they reach a certain stage, and then they require investment for the next stage, or require regulatory approval. You mentioned regulation, product acceptance or certification. Then suddenly the support is no longer there. Because we nurture the little small firms and the spin-offs, but when they're trying to scale up, to transform the larger small firms and the medium firms, the large firms, they have tons of people to help them navigate through these regulatory system and business innovation and growth support programs. But the medium firms, I mean, you have CEOs who work 90 hours a week. They don't have time. They don't have the resources. Once they have knocked at, the doors of 3 programs and they've been told no, and they give up. They don't have time to actually waste. So we need to help firms navigate this, this maze of programs. So help them, go through the program, but also the external funding is not there. So once you start wanting to grow, you're going to need more funding. then the Canadian funding is not there. So we have tons of little SMEs that are ripe for the picking by the US, for example, or other countries. And this is how we lose a lot of firms. So when you start measuring the impact of innovation, if these firms are no longer there, then you also measure less firms, less growth, less everything at the country level.
So now what we've done is we've connected productivity to innovation to expansion. And one of the other major complaints about Canada when it comes to its business environment is that Canadians don't know how to scale up an organization. We'll turn to BlackBerry as perhaps the one that is the outlier in that respect. Even though it has substantially cratered from its height, it was one of the few that managed to go global. Whereas to your point, we see a lot of foreign companies snapping up small to medium-sized entrepreneurial organizations. So does Ottawa simply double down on tax credits, or does it need to diversify its toolbox?
Well, it's probably a mix, but it definitely needs to diversify its toolbox. But we can't actually pinpoint in the study that you mentioned at the beginning. We can't actually link directly specific programs to the impact. Because the questionnaire that I used that was run by Statistics Canada is not designed to identify specific families of programs with the obstacles to innovation, what firms actually do to overcome obstacles to innovation, whether they use government programs or not. We don't know what these government programs are. So it's very difficult to follow and measure the impact of a specific program because they're not designed and we're not collecting the data in order to be able to evaluate that. So when you mention that we need to, potentially diversify, in the study, what we show is that firms that use tax credits, they managed to increase by about 11.3% their propensity to innovate compared to firms that don't use these tax credits. If they use direct grants, then it's nearly 12%. So tax credit is one part of the story, but our results actually show that tax credits, they're everywhere. Most firms use them, but they're not specifically targeted at overcoming a specific barrier. Other programs that have an impact, for example, the use of government or having facilitated access to government research facilities. These increase the propensity to nearly 15%. So firms that use these programs are 15% more likely to innovate. Another aspect that is important is obtaining technical assistance or information or advice to some extent. And these increase the propensity to innovate by 13%. So although we can't really pinpoint a specific program, because the National Research Council has labs throughout Canada, and its IRAP, Innovation and Research Assistant Program, are equally as widespread, they're probably both likely to have a positive impact on the innovation propensity of firms. And we have
do we just expand those types of programs? How can policymakers ensure government support complements private initiatives? Because there's that other aspect to the conversation of, well, if we just keep shoveling money at the private sector, they'll become accustomed to it and they won't be so innovative anymore. They'll rely on the government. How do we ensure that we're not replacing private initiative when we turn to policymakers to ensure that the government does support Canada's small to medium-sized firms to expand and be more productive?
Well, first, we don't have enough data to be able to answer this question. programs are not being evaluated as in their complementarity. We don't know what works with what. We have, at the moment, we're using the business innovation and growth support data that Treasury Board has mandated Statistics Canada to collect. So what our preliminary results show that a firm that has received advice, no money, just advice, and a lot of the IRAP programs actually provide advice. In the following years, they will receive more research, more funds for innovation purposes from the big suite of programs than other firms. So receiving advice helps them navigate through the big kind of maze that we have. So it's not receiving money, but if you're measuring how much public money the firm receives, then you're missing some of the story, because the mentorship, the coaching also matters. And it's the complementarity of which programs is being used with which that we're blind. We don't know, because this is the only database that we have at the moment. And if you mix that database with the database that was used for this, the survey, the commentary that you mentioned, you only have about 8,000 firms. And within those, some of them used the BIGS programs, some of them didn't. So you're left with a much smaller sample. So you have a problem of not enough data to actually make have a definite answer to what you're saying.
I wonder how much of this is just the nature of being Canadian. I think back to my 20-year career in television, where if you walked into NBC and said, I've got an idea for a TV show, and you lay it all out and they love it, question number one will always be, who else is doing this? And if the answer is nobody, then the response is, sign me up. You take that exact same idea to a Canadian broadcaster, they'll ask the exact same question. Is anybody else doing this? And when you say no, the answer is, come back to me when somebody else is doing it. It's why we have The Amazing Race Canada. It's why we have Price is Right Canada. It's why we have blank, blank, blank Canada. We don't take risks. And I was fascinated to learn through your work that 43% of firms cite risk and uncertainty as their top obstacle. Well, no, duh, you're in business.
Well, of course, but when you're trying to innovate, there's so many things that you don't control. I mean, you try things, but you don't know what the issue is. You don't know what the new technology is going to work.
But Americans will jump on an idea. Canadians have a tendency to wait it out. Is there a disconnect in our productivity level and our innovation capability simply because we grew up with Mr. Dress-Up instead of Mr. Rogers?
Well, I think it depends on the generation. The television I was watching in Quebec was very, very innovative. I guess it's a generation thing. There's not much you can do when you're trying to innovate regarding uncertainty and risk. You try things, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can try many, 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 many things. The idea is to fail fast and try again. If you're trying to show your kid to go on a bicycle, they will fall, but the important is get back on and, try and try and try until you get it. Where we have problems is, I mentioned the financing. Very often you'll have funding from the US because they say, oh, well, that's a good idea. Well, we'll have that. But nobody in Canada will have invested. The other thing is that very often before you can certify or approve or use an innovation, they say, well, have it validated somewhere. So once it's been certified or regulated or used in the US firm, then, we're the second adopters in Canada. But very often we've lost the market. We've lost this firm to another country. And that has repercussions in our local ecosystems, because it's the microcosm of interrelationships between universities, industry, small firms, larger firm within our innovation ecosystem that make these firms stronger. Once you remove an important firm that is on the verge of scaling up and you send it to the US, then you lose this capacity to have students who go and work as interns in the firm and then bring back ideas and bring ideas from their university lab to the firm. So this microcosm is, being destroyed when you have the investment. And sometimes the investment, they'll say, oh, no, you don't collaborate with University of Montreal. We have, Purdue and Georgia Tech and Caltech and MIT in the US, and we know these guys, so we'll hook you up with all these. So we lose as well some of the university industry relationships when these firms first have their market in the US, have their investment in the US, have the IP in the US. So we need to be more proactive to keep IP talent firms' investment in Canada, and that takes risks.
Catherine, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Catherine Beaudry is a professor at Polytechnique Montreal and an Institute Fellow in Residence. Read her report, Unleashing Innovation, Barriers, Government Support Programs, and What Works Best at cdhow.org. And for the record, as a proud Canadian, I am not suggesting anything about Ernie Coombs. He was a wonderful Canadian version of Mr. Rogers. My preference, frankly. I'm Michael Ainsworth. Thank you for joining us.